It began like so many suburban stories do, with a simple project meant to improve a home, not start a neighborhood feud. The house sat on a quiet cul-de-sac, lined with nearly identical beige homes and manicured lawns that all seemed cut from the same pattern. It was a community ruled not by chaos, but by rules, pages and pages of them, bound together under the name of the Homeowners Association. The homeowner, a man named Evan, had lived there for 4 years. He'd paid his dues, trimmed his hedges, and followed every letter of the bylaws. He'd even tolerated the monthly newsletters, the friendly reminders left on doorknobs about trash cans being visible for more than 30 minutes, and the annual threats about repainting mailboxes. But one spring, he decided to make one small change: a fence. It wasn't elaborate. Just a simple wooden fence to keep his dogs from escaping and to give his small backyard a sense of privacy. He measured carefully, stayed within the property line, and even chose a shade of stain that matched the guidelines he thought he remembered. He worked quietly over the weekend, content in the hum of a new project completed by his own hands, but in communities like this, silence never lasts long. Within days, the letter arrived. It was printed on heavy paper with the HOA's embossed logo at the top, as if to emphasize authority. It stated, in sharp, emotionless sentences, that the fence violated Section 12, subparagraph C, regarding approved fencing materials and styles. According to the association, only pre-approved vinyl fencing in colonial white was acceptable. His rustic cedar panels, they said, were an eyesore. He was fined $200 and ordered to remove the fence within 14 days. Evan reread the letter several times, unsure if it was real or a prank. But when he checked the official HOA handbook, the rule was indeed there, buried deep among other regulations about flag placement and seasonal wreath sizes. He hadn't noticed it before, because it wasn't part of the version he'd received when he moved in. The board had updated the rules last year and distributed them only by email, an email he apparently never received. He tried to appeal. He sent polite emails, attached photos, explained that the fence was tasteful, safe, and within code. The response came from the HOA president herself, a woman named Marjorie, whose name appeared on nearly every rule reminder that crossed anyone's doorstep. The message was short, almost perfunctory. All homeowners are expected to comply with current regulations. Failure to do so will result in further penalties. He removed the fence, not because he agreed, but because he didn't want the fines to grow. Each board notice came with escalating numbers and thinly veiled threats of legal action. And yet, as he stacked the wood panels in his garage, something inside him began to shift. He looked out at his bare yard, open once more to the gaze of the neighborhood, and he realized something profound. He no longer wanted to belong. He began to read the bylaws carefully, line by line, as though decoding a sacred text written in pediness. He noticed contradictions, outdated sections, and ambiguous clauses that gave the board far more power than they likely understood. And in those pages, he began to form an idea. A plan, a quiet act of rebellion that would turn the HOA's own rules against them. He wouldn't build another fence. He would build something so undeniably different, so technically compliant yet utterly outrageous, that the board's own obsession with regulation would trap them in their own web. And that is how a fine over a simple wooden fence became the spark that would soon lead to the most bizarre structure the HOA had ever seen. Evan didn't know it yet, but before the summer was over, neighbors would drive by his property in disbelief. News crews would arrive. Drones would hover. And Marjorie, the queen of conformity, would find her reign tested by something no HOA handbook had ever anticipated: a castle. Construction began quietly, almost innocently. It started with a single delivery: pallets of stone veneer blocks stacked neatly in Evan's driveway. The neighbors assumed he was landscaping. Even Marjorie, ever vigilant, didn't notice at first. She was too preoccupied with the upcoming HOA Summer Gala to inspect every project in progress. But as the weeks went on, the scope of Evan's landscaping began to take shape, literally. A foundation rose at the edge of his backyard. Not concrete posts for a deck or a garden wall, but something more medieval. The first real sign came when the turrets appeared. Small at first, barely higher than the fence line, but distinct. Rounded corners, decorative battlements, and stone arches began to emerge, giving the unmistakable impression of a miniature fortress. By the time Marjorie noticed, the project was too far along to ignore. She sent a notice demanding he stop construction immediately, citing a lack of architectural approval. But Evan had done his homework. Every detail of his project, from material to height to color, adhered precisely to the association's own vague guidelines for outdoor structures. The bylaws specified that outbuildings such as sheds, gazebos, or playhouses were permitted up to a certain square footage, provided they matched the aesthetic of the main residence and did not exceed 12 feet in height. Nowhere did it say what shape they must be, or what era they had to look like. So when confronted, Evan simply pointed to the relevant section and smiled. His castle, technically, was an outbuilding. A personal art installation, fully compliant. The HOA held an emergency meeting. Marjorie called it a disturbance to neighborhood harmony. Others called it hilarious. Some, quietly, called it inspiring. For years, homeowners had grumbled about arbitrary fines and aesthetic tyranny. Now, one of their own had found a loophole, a way to fight back without breaking a single rule. Week by week, the castle grew taller. Decorative flags appeared. A drawbridge-style door replaced the simple gate. The local kids began calling it Fort Freedom. Delivery drivers slowed down to take photos. A video of the structure went viral on social media with the caption, "HOA hates my fence, so I built this instead." The comments poured in, "This guy is a legend. King of the cul-de-sac. Marjorie must be losing her mind." And she was. She began visiting the site daily, clipboard in hand, looking for any infraction that could justify tearing it down. She scrutinized paint shades, measured distances, even tried to claim the decorative flagpole violated height restrictions. But every time, Evan countered with printed copies of their own rules, highlighted and indexed. The rest of the board started to fracture under the pressure. Some believed they should let it go. Others feared it would set a dangerous precedent. What if other homeowners began interpreting the rules for themselves? What if the beige uniformity of their neighborhood cracked under creative chaos? Meanwhile, the castle became a symbol of defiance, of individuality, of the quiet power that comes from understanding the system better than those who enforce it. But the HOA was not finished. Marjorie, unwilling to admit defeat, escalated the fight. She filed a formal complaint with the city, alleging that the castle violated local zoning codes. She expected them to shut it down, but once again, the paperwork betrayed her. Evan had already checked the city's ordinances and obtained a minor building permit for a decorative structure. The city had no problem with it. And so, the battle that began with a single fence fine had now become a full-blown spectacle. The HOA's authority was slipping, the neighbors were rallying, and the once peaceful community had become ground zero for the strangest property dispute in the county. By midsummer, the castle stood complete, grey stone walls gleaming under the sun, banners fluttering gently in the breeze. It wasn't huge, but it was magnificent in its own absurd way, a monument to stubbornness and wit. Evan didn't host a ribbon cutting or a party. He simply sat in his backyard one evening, sipping a drink by the small stone tower he'd built with his own hands, and watched the sunset over his walls. But across the street, behind closed curtains, Marjorie was plotting something bigger, something that would make the castle seem like the calm before the storm. The first sign of escalation came not from Marjorie herself, but from the stack of envelopes that began to appear in every homeowner's mailbox. They were stamped urgent and bore the HOA logo. Inside, residents found a letter announcing a special assessment fee to cover legal costs for defending neighborhood integrity. In short, Marjorie was suing Evan. The lawsuit alleged devaluation of neighborhood property and willful defiance of community standards. It sought the removal of the castle and repayment of supposed damages to the HOA's reputation. Most neighbors were outraged, not at Evan, but at the association. They'd had enough of the endless control. For years, they'd been told what flowers to plant, when to mow, how long to keep their garage doors open. Now, their dues were being used to fight a man who'd followed the rules more closely than anyone. The castle became a rallying point. Supporters left notes of encouragement on his mailbox. Local news stations ran segments with titles like Castle vs. HOA, The Battle of the Burbs. Petitions circulated online calling for Marjorie's resignation. And still, the legal fight dragged on, but Evan had anticipated this too. He countered with a meticulously prepared defense, photographic documentation, permits, expert testimony from a local architect who confirmed that the structure was sound and fully compliant. The HOA's own records, when subpoenaed, revealed inconsistent enforcement of its rules and even instances where Marjorie had approved similar decorative projects for friends on the board. When the hearing finally came, it was standing room only. Neighbors packed the room. The air buzzed with tension. The judge listened patiently as both sides presented their case. The HOA's lawyer argued emotional points about neighborhood character and visual uniformity. Evan's side relied on hard evidence. In the end, the verdict was clear. The castle stayed. The HOA was ordered to pay court costs. The special assessment was revoked. Marjorie's authority, once absolute, began to crumble. Within weeks, several board members resigned. At the next election, the homeowners voted for a new board, one that promised transparency, fairness, and fewer rules about fence colors. As for Marjorie, she moved away quietly a few months later, her house listed under private agent, her name whispered only as a cautionary tale. The castle, though smaller than any real fortress, stood as a symbol of something larger, a reminder that even in the most regulated corners of suburbia, creativity and persistence could outlast control. Over time, the structure became a local landmark. On Halloween, kids came dressed as knights and princesses to take pictures in front of it. The town even featured it in a small tourism brochure under unique local attractions. And for Evan, the victory wasn't about revenge, it was about freedom. The right to enjoy one's home without fear of pettiness disguised as order. The right to build something beautiful, even if others didn't understand it. The story spread far beyond the cul-de-sac, shared across forums and social media, told again and again under new titles. HOA fined me for my fence, so I built a castle. The man who beat the HOA with a loophole. How to turn a fine into a fortress. But for those who lived there, it was simply the story of the summer the neighborhood changed forever. The summer when one homeowner turned rules into rubble and the HOA into history. And every time a new neighbor moved in, they'd ask about the odd stone structure at the end of the street. Someone would smile and say, "Oh, that's the castle that beat the HOA."